Thank you for joining Wars of the Roses as we continue with Part 7, The Doctrine of the 10 Emanations. Book 2, The Doctrinal Content of the Kabalah, from the Doctrine and Literature of the Kabalah by Arthur Edward Waite. 2. The Doctrine of the 10 Emanations. Having thus postulated the existence of the absolute and the unconditioned, the next concern of the Kabalah is the mode of the manifestation of that withdrawn and inconceivable nature. Having attained its ultimate and fundamental conception of the deity by the process of elimination to which reference has been made already, it was inevitable that the attribution of absolute reality to that which had been stripped of all realism should have produced as a result something which was outside intellectual comprehension. It is perhaps open to question whether this fact justified the transcendency with which Ein Sof was invested, as it is also doubtful whether the methodical and elaborated antithesis of anthropomorphism thus created was not as much a convention of the human mind as that which it sought to replace. The intellectual difficulty was, however, the ground for the exaltation of the conception at the expense of the human mind by which it had been devised so laboriously. Now the Jew was confronted by at least two problems which called for the exercise of his further ingenuity as regards the latent deitas of Ein Sof. He had to account for the bond of connection between this abyss of the Godhead and the visible universe, having man for its mouthpiece. But so far this is only the common problem of all philosophy, which begins and ends in the unconditioned. He had further a problem peculiar to his own inheritance and election, and this was to establish another bond of connection between the absolute transcendency of Ein Sof, apart from all limitation, outside all human measurement, isolated from all relationship, and the anthropomorphic Lord of Israel, whose stature and measurements were not beyond the ingenuity of rabbinical calculations, and most of whose members are mentioned with sufficient fullness and frequency in the sacred writings for any devout student to possess a clear notion of the body of God, and to describe it did he please, and we shall see later on that he did with considerable precision in a book dedicated to the question. For the moment, however, we are concerned only with the first problem, namely the difficulty of conceiving why the abyssal state in which God unmanifest had been sufficient from eternity to himself should at any period have had another mode superadded to it. I say superadded by convention based on the notion of sufficiency. It is not a reasonable term to make use of in such a relation to which no terminology is suitable. The non-est dwelling in the non-est is like the cipher of the decimal system. Of itself it is nothing, and its extension produces nothing. So also it is not possible to add to it, but it gives power to all numbers. The solution offered by Kabbalism does not differ materially from that which has been always given. It is, in a word, the movement of the divine will. In this, says Myers, the unknown absolute, above all number, manifested itself through an emanation in which it was immanent, yet as to which it was transcendental. We are dealing here with a system of speculative philosophy, and traditional or otherwise, it must not be supposed to be free from the disabilities of other philosophies or from the crudities of its particular period. The Kabbalistic hypothesis supposes an eternity antecedent to this initial operation of the divine will, and in the latent subsistence of Ein Sof, it would appear an inconsequence to assume that there was either will or consciousness possible. Both, however, by a common and almost inevitable anachronism, are attributed to Ein Sof, despite the warning of the Zohar already quoted, "Woe unto him who shall compare him with any mode or attribute, even with one of his own." The later commentators on the Zohar either do not recognize or are content to ignore the difficulty. Thus, a treatise entitled The Royal Valley by Rabbi Naphtali Hertz says, "Blessed be his holy name. Before anything was, he by his simple will proposed to himself to fashion the worlds. For the king is not given without the people, as it is written in Proverbs 14:28. In the multitude of the people is the king's honor, and it is the nature of the supreme goodness to dispense good. Now if the world were not, on whom could he bestow it?" Exegetical literature, treatises like The Gates of Light, indicate that the exertion of the divine will in the production of the emanations is a path so secret that no creature, not even Moses himself, can understand it. At the same time, that will is beneplacitum, or good pleasure, and beneplacetum termen carens, without end or limit. Hence, the motive by which the universe is accounted for is the same motive which communicates the mercy of God to them that fear him. After which it will be unnecessary to say that optimism is the fundamental characteristic of Kabbalism, or that, according to the Zohar, this is, in some respects, the best of all possible worlds. Seeing then that the transition of the divine being from the state of the non-ens was accomplished, like the conversion of man from the condition of a merely material creature, by an operation of the mystery of the will, we have next to ascertain something of the nature of this process. And this leads us to the word which I have already mentioned inadvertently, namely, emanation. In specifying what followed from the motion of the divine will, we must, I think, in an elementary treatise, set aside two subtle inquiries into the sense in which terms were used. It must be allowed in any case that the Kabalah repudiates implicitly the axiom ex nihilo nihil fit, for the non-ens dwelling in the unconditioned state wherein is neither time nor place is the fullness which contains the all. Ex plenitudine ista omnia fiunt. In this divine plenitude, pre-existing eternally, was the substance of all the worlds, which therefore came forth from God. Hence the Kabbalistic system is one of emanation, when it is said that emanation is not its only foundation, for it rests also on the identity of thought and existence, or otherwise the doctrine of divine immanence. There is much in the literature which would tempt us to endorse this view after due allowance has been made for the confusion and obscurity of the originals. But it is not necessary to follow it at any length. It is enough for the present purpose to say that the term emanation is more in harmony with the doctrine of the Kabalah than is that of creation, and the rejection of the axiom already mentioned is perhaps little more than a play upon words. We are not, however, concerned as yet with the evolution of the physical universe. The first consequence which followed the operation of the divine will was the manifestation or unfolding of the divine attributes in a word, the transition of deity from the latent to the active state. As in the one he was above all number, so in the other he may be said to have produced numbers, and the decade is the emanation of Ein Sof. We must not be so crude as to suppose that the mere arithmetical numerals are here intended. It was powers, forces, vitalities, virtues, attributes, principles, which were thus produced, and in the first instance the Sephiroth, as they are termed, belong solely to the world of deity. The names which are assigned to them are 1. Kether, the supreme crown. 2. Chokmah, wisdom. 3. Blanah, intelligence or understanding. 4. Chest, mercy, otherwise Gedula, magnificence or benignity. 5. Geburah, severity. 6. Tilfereth, beauty. 7. Netzach, splendor. 8. Hod, victory. 9. Jesod, the foundation. 10. Malkuth, the kingdom. The conjunction of Chokmah and Binah produced a quasi-emanation called Darth, knowledge, but it is not one of the Sephiroth. To these 10 emanations or numerations, various profound meanings are attached. Indeed, the study of the Kabbalistic system of the Sephiroth constitutes a science by itself, and one which is full of complexity. We are not concerned here with its exhaustive presentation, which would fill volumes, or with more than its elementary symbolism. We are concerned, in a word, not with what it may have been designed to conceal for the benefit of a circle of initiates, which is the claim of occult science, but with what it was intended to explain. And this explanation may offer some warrant for concluding that outside it there is only the province of fantasy. Beyond a certain point, it is not reasonable to suppose a double meaning in any literature. The theory of many-sided allegories does credit only to the ingenuity of the critic, and of its general value we have had a typical instance in Talmudic exegesis. The initial purpose of the Sephirotic system was undoubtedly to provide intermediaries between the deity and the material world. It is that of all doctrines of emanation. But while we reject conjectures for which no warrant is produced, we must be careful not to fall into the opposite error. To bridge the gulf between the finite and the infinite, and to effect a correspondence by stages between the inconceivable purity of the divine nature and the uncleanness attributed to matter by all the old theosophies, was not the sole purpose of the Sephirotic system, a point which is sometimes missed by the merely academical critic. It is affirmed by hostile writers, for example, by Dr. Ginsburg, that as the earliest Kabbalistic literature does not contain the doctrine of Am Sof, so also it wants that of the Sephiroth. But it is above challenge that the germ of the Sephirotic scheme must be sought in the Sefer Yetzirah. The 10 numerations of that treatise are in fact the Sephiroth, and it seems quite impossible to maintain the contrary opinion. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment, and if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Roses. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.